Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just about a minute. Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good afternoon for me, actually, and good morning to others. My name is Rich Harper. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Outdoor Industry Association. I'm based in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., speaking to you today from our auxiliary office in Bethesda, Maryland. Welcome to this session, A New Beginning, Opportunities and Challenges for Outdoor Products and Global Supply Chains in 2021. Over the past several years, outdoor companies have faced a series of challenges to their businesses and supply chains, from steel and aluminum tariffs, the US-China trade war, the uncertainty of what may come next, and on top of all of this, a global pandemic. With a new administration and Congress with a vaccine rollout, outdoor companies are looking ahead to taking advantage of a surge in interest in outdoor recreation and getting back to doing what they do best: developing new, innovative outdoor apparel, footwear, and equipment to enhance the outdoor experience. I'm pleased to be joined today by a distinguished panel of trade experts, supply chain experts from a diverse group of outdoor companies, many of which serve on our Trade Advisory Council. And so first, I'd like to kick it off with Ben for introductions.
Thank you, Rich. My name is Ben Christensen. I'm the Vice President of Operations with Simms Fishing Products in Bozeman, Montana. A key trade priority for me right now is navigating around challenges getting product out of Vietnam. That is a near-term issue that we face, I think many others face. And longer term, it's building a supply chain that's more resilient should we encounter, or when we inevitably encounter, additional challenges down the road.
I'm Sarah Bowersox, and I'm the Senior Manager for Global Trade Compliance at Keen Footwear in Portland, Oregon. And Ben neglected to mention that he's also our esteemed chairperson of the OIA Trade Advisory Council, and I am the vice chair.
I'm Brent Merriam. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Nemo Equipment. We're an outdoor gear brand based in New Hampshire. In terms of trade priorities, mine are similar to Ben's, which are just getting product out of the various countries that they're being produced in and delivered to our warehouses. But also reinstatement of the GSP program is important for us.
Hi, I'm Emily Vita. I'm Senior Manager of Global Customs and Trade at Columbia Sportswear. And one of our key trade priorities is the reinstatement of the GSP program, as well as being able to use de minimis benefits out of U.S. foreign trade zones.
I'm Lauren Vandenberg. I'm the Director of Global Logistics with the REI Co-op. One of the key priorities or focuses for us for 2021 is similar to Ben, which we think about as minimizing or mitigating supply chain disruption and building better resilience into our ability to move product for our customers.
Well, thank you, everyone. Really looking forward to this discussion. I also want to introduce virtually our outside trade counsel, Ron Serini, and his team from Serini Salmon and Associates, who are key partners for OIA and OIA members on our trade agenda. I want to start with looking back a little bit and some of the challenges over the past few years. I mentioned a series of them in my introduction. So I want to get a better understanding of how they impacted your businesses and how you responded, and what the outlook for the year ahead. And Let's start with a topic that I recall discussing at the last in-person meeting at Outdoor Retailer in January 2020. We were talking about the impact of the COVID pandemic on our partners in China and when we anticipated some of those factories reopening. Let's start with Ben. And Ben, you're a domestic manufacturer, also utilize global supply chains. How did the COVID-19 impact Sims and some of the key responses that you all achieved?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. The impact that we experienced globally varied significantly from one country to the other. And we continue to see some impacts in terms of some of the ongoing effects of COVID, both on local populations as well as on capacity within supply chains. As Rich mentioned, we also manufacture in Bozeman, Montana. We have a Gore-Tex outerwear factory here where we produce Gore-Tex waders. That operation shut down in the spring, and we quickly transitioned to manufacturing medical gowns. We produced about 10,000 gowns, which we distributed mostly to underserved communities in this country through philanthropic partnerships. So, that was really a bright spot for us as a business, and certainly a bright spot for our team. One of the biggest impacts that we're experiencing from COVID now is that, like many other brands, we really pulled back on our inventory purchases last spring. A lot of our suppliers pulled back on their capacity. All of us were in risk mitigation mode. And of course, our business has exceeded expectations. We're trying to catch up on inventory, but there simply isn't enough capacity in the supply chain to support our needs, as well as the needs of all of the other brands that are going through a similar experience. So we're very much in a sort of catch-up mode, trying to stay caught up. That's true overseas with imported product as well as with our manufactured product in Bozeman.
Sarah, you're also a domestic manufacturer and one that utilizes global supply chains. You have a variety of partners you work with. What was the COVID-19 impact on Keen?
It was and continues to be a roller coaster ride. Rich, you mentioned when we were all together in person the last time, and the US had not yet shut down, we were talking about the impact on our supply chains and our suppliers in China. Keen already had pivoted to have a much lighter footprint in China for finished footwear in order to avoid the China 301 tariffs, which we're going to talk about next. So there wasn't an immediate effect from that for our finished footwear, but once we made that change in March and we sent everybody home from Keen HQ, we were faced with a different reality. And part of that was that obviously our distribution center had to keep working, and we had to figure out a safe way for that to happen. We also have our US production that needed to keep working, and we needed to find a safe way for that to happen. Additionally, Keen also pivoted to PPE production and made masks. So our Keen factory, our own factory in Thailand, diverted a lot of their resources from footwear to making masks. And we started offering those to consumers, also to our wholesale partners and to other folks who wanted to purchase those. So we changed our business. We figured out a way to keep our business operating in person that needed to keep operating in person. And then the next phase was also what Ben commented on. We anticipated that there was going to be a reduction in the amount of product that we would need. So we made that adjustment. And then, much to our surprise, everybody decided that the outside was the best place to be in a pandemic and the safest way to recreate. So people started going outside a lot, and they wanted shoes and boots and sandals to do that in. So then we started facing this situation where we had this ramp up, and now we have to figure out how to make that happen after we scaled it back. So it's literally been a roller coaster of, up, down, back up again, and now we're sort of in this, I wouldn't call it a downward slope, but I would call it a tight spot, because like many other panelists have pointed out, there is a worldwide shortage of availability of logistics and transportation right now. There's a physical shortage of actual shipping containers. There are not enough boats to put those shipping containers on, and there are not enough sailings of those boats to get product where people need to be. And I think I see a lot of nods coming from my fellow panelists. We're all facing that challenge right now, and that's the latest struggle on the COVID roller coaster ride.
Brent, I'm still building off of that. I'm still looking for a new Stargaze chair. And I'm constantly refreshing the NEMO website to find one available. I know, you've been a growing, innovative outdoor company already dealing with a series of challenges, and then COVID hit. Talk to me about the year behind you and the year ahead for NEMO.
Sure. Well, first of all, you can get a Stargaze chair. They're available. So we do have supply of those. It was, as Sarah described, a roller coaster. In January and February, we started to see the first impacts of the pandemic on some of our factory partners. They had closed or disruptions in terms of the number of folks who could be at the factory. In fact, I was in Vietnam and Taiwan in early February, working with other factory partners to increase and accelerate production to overcome some of the shortages and delays we are anticipating. So I was basically begging for more production in February. And then in mid-March, which is I think when the US sort of recognized that this was a global pandemic and we might want to do something differently, once that realization occurred, I think retailers, began canceling or postponing orders, which in turn made us cancel or postpone orders with our factories. So it was really a domino effect. And there was a period of about 2 months where demand really fell off a cliff, like from end consumers. And then in mid-May, when retailers began to reopen brick and mortar stores and make things available for curbside pickup, and also just online retail took off, it was a new challenge, which was to, get back to those factories with whom we had just postponed our orders and turn them back on. So the rest of 2020 really was a race to secure inventory, get it to our customers, and then secure factory capacity for 2021, because we as a brand are seeing unprecedented demand right now. I think there are other industries like it. The bike industry is in the same boat. It's hard to buy a bike right now. And we've been forced to make commitments relative to 2022 earlier than we've ever been. But I guess the good news is that we have recovered and our supply chain partners seem to be recovering, and business looks good for 2021 and 2022 at this point. But man, I don't really want to do this again.
My apologies, Ben. I understand that Stargaze chairs are available, and so I don't want to undermine your business there. But moving from we've had small businesses to one of our global brands, Columbia. And so Emily, you've heard your colleagues talk about the challenges they face. How was it for Columbia, a global brand with several other brands underneath the Columbia umbrella? Yeah,
we went through a lot of the same exact things that all the other brands represented here did, where we faced, we were ramping up for a normal year and then had to, I don't know how many orders we canceled. I'm sure we had to cut back on our orders, but then we also had a tremendous amount of supply that we had to move around the world as well, and kind of reconfigure where our product was going in the first place. So there was a lot of kind of scrambling to optimize the inventory that we had over the last year. So that was, we saw a lot of transfers and things like that between different inventory places that we have. The other thing was, even though, like Sarah said, a lot of us have moved out of China if we're able, but our raw material source had a lot of challenges over the last year too, where, first, we were cut off from getting raw materials from China. There's other issues with that now. And so it was kind of hard to move our fabrics around. So that was a challenge. And then we were just kind of chasing which countries were, we really had to kind of stay on top of which countries were closing down all production. So we kind of had to work with balancing our supply chain and our source base over the last year. And yes, we're also, everybody's facing the cargo shortage that we're now dealing with. I think I heard yesterday that there's only 22 vessels in the world that aren't on the water, and that's because they're being repaired. So every other vessel, ocean vessel in the world is in use right now.
It's a mad scramble
Yeah.
for those cargo ships. Lauren, I want to bring you into the conversation. REI, key retail. You sell a lot of the goods of members on this presentation. You have your own brand. What was your experience like?
We lived everybody's experiences here, I think, Rich. And, I think as we look back at 2020, we're going to bucket things into life before COVID, life during COVID, and life after COVID. It stressed and tested us in ways nobody really could have anticipated before this all. We saw such a huge growth in our digital business early on. As we closed stores down, digital took off and took us to levels we hadn't expected to see for 2 or 3 years, and it's still staying really high. We learned a ton through that as we, shipped products we'd never shipped really digitally before. Bikes is a really good example. We were doing canoes and kayaks to people's doorsteps. So we lived through that. What I haven't heard us talk about a whole lot is we also, as organizations, all found really different and new ways to work. This panel is a great example. Here we are live streaming, and I don't think we really would have had that much on our radar. For us, I think as we look back at the year, we learned that health and safety of our employees was paramount. We closed our stores down early, ahead of a lot of folks, I think. And we kept them closed until we were comfortable we could reopen safely. We learned that we always have to keep the customer and the member front and center, how they want to shop, where they want to shop, how they want to receive product, how they want to return product, is all critical to the success we had in 2020. And I think the other aspect I would just add is that we learned with focus, as an organization, we can do a lot. And I think all the companies on this call have learned the same. A really good example for us is our curbside pickup. We really didn't have much of a curbside product in February of 2020. But we, as we were reopening stores, we found there was demand for curbside. We started off pretty rudimentarily. It was like, put a phone number in the door, call this number when you're here to pick up. And we've evolved that product now to one that's fully functional with technology. It's got a robust solution, pull up, check in, get delivered. So I think it's just a really good reminder that there's a lot of resilience amongst all of the companies, and our ability to innovate and adapt to serve our customers remains first and foremost across many of our supply chains and across our organizations.
I've certainly used multiple platforms to obtain outdoor gear over the past year or so, curbside, online. And I agree with you. I think companies have been resilient, certainly resilient in the face of a global pandemic that came on top of, I think, an issue that we were dealing with for the 2 years prior to the onset of COVID-19. And that's the US-China trade war and the 301 tariffs that hit outdoor products with list 3, and then list 4A, which hit a bunch of outdoor apparel and footwear. And of course, as you all well know, and the audience knows, these are punitive tariffs on top of the high tariffs a lot of outdoor products already pay. So Sarah, I want to start with you. Your Keen's reaction to the US-China trade war. You did have a diverse group of vendor partners that you work with, but still impacted your company. How did you respond? And with the 301 tariffs likely to remain in place for the foreseeable future, what does the year ahead look like?
Well, first off, Keen has a diverse supply chain, and we have a variety of origins where our footwear comes from, including from our own factories, which in 2020 were in Thailand, in Mexico, and here in the United States. So we have sort of a different shape to our supply chain because of that own factory element. But we did have production in China as well as a variety of other places. So what we tried to do was look at what was in China, determine which China 301 list they were on. There is still some footwear, which is on the yet to be deployed list 4B. So it does not have additional duty associated with it. We made some very strategic choices as to if we need to make something in China, if that is the best place to make these specific types of footwear, we can't afford to leave them there because they won't have the additional duty. But there's a lot that goes into play. It's not just the duty. It's like, okay, so we leave that there, but then maybe it's not enough to make up a full container load at a decent, shipping cadence. So maybe we save duty, but we end up paying it in freight. That really doesn't help us much. So it's a very complicated calculus, but Keen did a great job of making our footprint in China very, very light to avoid the China 301 duty. But then what happened during our roller coaster ride is that as demand perked back up again, and we realized that we needed to get more shoes here fast so that more people could go outside, we actually had to look at going back to China just because that's where the capacity was, because everybody left China because of the China 301. And then as we're all scrambling for capacity, as the economy, freshens up, some people are going back, and it's not just Keen. I've heard it from other brands that, there's capacity there, and we need that capacity. So we're not back in a big sense, but we definitely are strategically returning to China with styles that make sense to produce there.
Brent, I know you were dealing with this issue in the lead up in terms of advocacy, supply chain management, and you also, I think, came to Washington many times to share your story. So for the group here today, 301 tariffs, the impact on Nemo, a growing, innovative, small company, impact on your business and on jobs, and what the year ahead looks like.
Sure. I think, the round 3 China 301 tariffs were imposed in 2018, and that affected our newly introduced line of camp chairs, which at that time represented about 10% of our overall business. And the supply chain was firmly centered in China. At that time, 99% of imports of camp chairs to the USA were from China. So there weren't many other sourcing alternatives. But when the punitive tariffs increased from 10% to 25%, we had no choice but to establish a new supply chain outside of China, because clearly 25% additional costs are really unsustainable. So it took a year, a significant investment of development resources that would otherwise have been spent on new product development, and a full retooling in order to set ourselves up for success in the new supply chain. We had already transitioned much of the supply chain out of China, but we're really forced to accelerate that process to avoid the tariffs on the camp chair line and other key revenue drivers. I would say that we have few products right now that are affected by the China 301 tariffs, and we're making moves to mitigate any of those tariffs in the next year or so.
Speaking of products not subject yet to any 301 tariffs, Emily, I know you're probably looking closely at list 4B as well, obviously impacted with apparel and footwear on 4A. How did Columbia manage the punitive tariffs? And do you anticipate any changes in the year ahead?
Well, here's hoping.
Right.
Yeah, we had a similar story to Sarah and Keen. Our biggest impact and our biggest footprint when this all started was footwear in China. And we made a lot of quick moves to get out, but there were things that weren't economically viable to move. So we just kind of had to keep them there. Maybe it was too expensive to move the tooling, or we didn't have enough capacity to make it make financial sense. So we did face that a little bit. And yeah, we've, from the first threat of 301 tariffs in, was it 2017? We kind of did fire drills as a company where we started with the worst case scenario. the threat initially was they're going to tariff everything. Then it came in these phases that we experienced. So we really banded together a lot across different departments to figure out how the best way to mitigate, changing our inventory status on existing China origin product in our foreign trade zone. So we did a lot of mitigation work along with moving our product. I think a lot of people tried to speed up their shipments to get in before the tariff date. A lot of us tried to do that when possible. Weighed the cost of air freight if that was going to equal out, which it rarely did. We just tried everything we could to kind of reduce that number. We still definitely have paid the tariffs over the last few years. But yeah, we've just worked really hard to avoid it as much as possible.
Ben, one of the key messages I think we shared on the Hill and with the administration many times is that these tariffs weren't just impacting importers, but domestic manufacturers as well. And so what was the Sims story with the 301 tariffs?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the inputs that we use in our manufacturing operation, Bozeman, do come from China. And so we did see higher import costs on those items. We also work with other domestic manufacturers that experienced just disruption to their supply chains. One good example of that is how wool is processed in China, not necessarily produced in China, but processed in China, and the disruption that had on all of the sock knitters in the United States. I think it's one of those things that was easy to oversimplify in terms of how this impacted supply chains. And I think it brought a lot of attention to the fact that in many regards, all supply chains touch China one way or another. It just isn't necessarily on the surface. It's often a bit deeper in the supply chain.
Lauren, what about you? A retailer perspective on the 301 tariffs. Your partners were hit, and REI as well.
Thanks, Rich. So I think that for us, the primary, most immediate impact was around our private label business. And this is where we spent a lot of our internal energy, and our folks dug deep into each and every set of product exclusions, required us digging in and examining every SKU in our product line to determine if the article qualified, and then, did it qualify based on tariff, and then go into the weights and measurements to make sure it qualified across all. It essentially was a huge time drag on the co-op, and it prevented us from being able to do a lot of other things that our trade and compliance group would have liked to have done. And we also were, under the gun like a lot of folks in terms of the reaction time from when things were announced to when we had to be able to get things in. As Emily mentioned, making those determinations between air freight and cost. We made a few of those decisions. The latest round of impacts that hit us at the beginning of the year, we rolled the dice on some ocean freight and some air freight. We won a little bit, we lost a little bit, but it still was very disruptive to try and have to react as quickly as we did and manage through a lot of those challenges.
I want to jump ahead with, thinking about lessons learned, what worked and what didn't work. And you all have touched on a little bit of this in the conversation about COVID, the China 301s. We're getting a lot of questions coming in, so I do want to make sure we do preserve some time for Q&A for the audience. So maybe, Ben, I'll start again with you in terms of, what worked, what didn't work, touching on supply chain management, and if you could add to that vendor relations. And so with the multitude of challenges, not just COVID, but the 301 tariffs and others that I'd hope to get to, but just in the sake of getting most of the Q&A, like, the uncertainty of GSP renewal and others, could touch a little bit of, the Sims lessons learned on supply chain management, vendor relations.
Sure. On supply chain management, it's just been incredibly dynamic. There have been so many changes in terms of quantities and dates for when product will be produced and when we'll be able to actually get product in-house. We run pretty lean at Sims in this area of our business. And so the team that works on just managing dates and quantities is exhausted. I don't think they've ever been so excited for Lunar New Year and a little bit of a break from the emails and the changes. It's also caused us to look differently at software and automation that makes all this work more efficient. And so we are implementing some new tools that just help improve communication with our suppliers and how information flows into our systems. In terms of sort of strategic sourcing, vendor relations, a couple things that jump out to me. One is the value of multi-country suppliers, a single relationship that has a presence in multiple countries. Another one is just a greater openness for CIMs of thinking about trading companies as a partner. We used to really prefer that we go direct with suppliers, and we're more open to trading companies, particularly if they have multi-country capabilities. Those two topics really just fit within diversification and flexibility, the ability to move quickly when things change. The other thing that has been really important for us is using this as an opportunity to actually do good by our suppliers. Rather than coming in and insisting on PO cancellations and change terms, we've actually come in and said, you're struggling, we're struggling, we're going to stand by you, we'll get through this together. We're going to remind you of what we're doing, and we're going to hope that this gives us a stronger partnership when we come out of it. That's particularly important for a brand like CIMs, where we're relatively small, we have very high expectations around quality. Long-term partnerships feel more important today than they ever have before.
Emily, again, the experiences you all have had as a global brand are, I'm sure, similar to smaller companies. What does Columbia take away from terms of supply chain management and vendor relations on the multitude of challenges over the past few years?
Yeah, especially with vendor relationships. Ben said it really well. We're kind of doing the same thing, even at a large scale, just making sure that the relationships that we have can offer us the flexibility that we need. I think flexibility is the name of the game right now for everybody that's producing overseas. Being able to, move your capacity from China to Vietnam to Bangladesh or India, it's really important to have that capability right now. And yeah, as far as supply chain management, we're really taking a hard look at, with the agility that we had to kind of come up with over the last year. I think there's a hard look at how best to maximize our network from source country to delivery. So there's a lot of work being done around that space right now as well.
It's spent so much time on this, but again, I want to cover a lot of ground here before we go to the Q&A. Brent, I want to bring you into the conversation about looking ahead to a new administration and Congress. And President Biden, during his campaign, emphasized the return to dialogue, multilateralism. Clearly, he has a focus on domestic priorities, but we know that trade issues are going to come up with this administration. So from NEMO's perspective, what do you anticipate that the challenges and opportunities will be, with an administration that may have produced more stable, predictable trade policy, but initially it's going to be focused on domestic priorities?
Yeah, I think we can see that, President Biden's actions in the first days of his presidency support the idea or a strategy of multilateralism, but with an initial focus on domestic priorities. For example, on his first day in office, he announced that he would seek to return the U.S. to the Paris Climate Accord and also stop the U.S. withdrawal from the World Health Organization. Both of those are multilateral actions. But the reality is that most of the executive orders issued in the last couple of weeks have been focused on domestic priorities, including immigration, equity, the economy, and most prevalently, battling the pandemic. From an international trade and climate perspective, I'm encouraged because we're rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. The Keystone XL pipeline was canceled. One of the executive orders was to direct agencies to review and reverse about 100 actions from the previous administration that were deemed detrimental to the environment. The president has reestablished the President's Council on Advisors on Science and Technology. He's elevated climate change as an essential element of U.S. foreign policy and national security. And he's already kicked off the development of new emissions targets, which will be announced in April. So I'm encouraged by the direction that the administration's taking. as it relates to our environment and engaging with the rest of the world.
You know, Brent, I think we could spend a full hour on just climate and sustainability with the new administration, how that's going to impact outdoor companies. And certainly, I think, as we've talked about before in other webinars, we have a partner to work with. But I also want to talk a little bit about, you know, everyone here has served on our Trade Advisory Council, has come to Washington, D.C. for lobby days, engaged in virtual lobby days. So Sarah, maybe I'll start with you. Just if you could speak to all these challenges that we face. We've made the case to the Hill of, you know, where we need their help, how they can, you know, mitigate some of the impact of these challenges. Talk a little bit about maybe the benefits of serving on the TAC and how advocacy with Congress and administration, particularly for a small company like Keen, can make a difference.
Yeah, it's been incredibly valuable. And I think it's a two-way street as well. So the first thing is being able to really have your ear to the ground as a brand and have access to information and, you know, what is happening, what might be happening, what we think we can have influence on. All of that is really, really key. And the other aspect is to have you know, to have access to be able to tell your story and to, you know, make a meaningful statement to people who can actually make decisions who can affect that. You know, obviously everybody who works in the government has a constituency. You are a part of that wherever you are, and your business and the people that you employ do make a difference to those folks. So being able to speak directly and state your case and explain what you're doing is huge. We also, one of the other tentative topics we had on this was tariff mitigation strategies. And really a big part of my tariff mitigation strategy is the access to information that I get from OIA and specifically from the TAC group, because a big part of mitigation is knowing what the heck is going on and knowing exactly how it's going to affect you and getting that information as early as possible, getting it in a great format that you can share out through your organization and to your leadership so that everybody knows, you know, that nobody's surprised and we can start strategizing what to do. That's really just been invaluable. Plus, on the personal side, I get to interact with all these nice people on a regular basis. So that's also great.
I know everyone's heart must skip a little bit over the past few years when they've seen an email from myself or Ron Serini or Outside Trade Council of what's next, you know, what new challenge are we going to face? So definitely looking forward to a more stable, predictable trade environment. We got a ton of questions, so I want to get to those and, you know, try to tackle as many as possible. And what we might do is take this collection of questions. If we don't get to them, we might do a follow-up email to the participants with some additional thoughts.
I'm raising my hand. Can I
Yes.
say something?
Yes.
So I noticed that a number of the questions are about domestic production, like diversifying, maybe doing more domestic production to remain more flexible. And the comment that I wanted to make is that doesn't always work. And Ben can chime in on this as well, because for Keen's domestic production, yes, you know, some shoes are made right here in Portland, Oregon, but the inputs to make those shoes come from everywhere. So even though the actual shoes themselves are being made here, we still suffer from supply chain impacts with all these things going on, whether it's COVID, whether it's the China 301, you know, we're still, you know, impacted by that. We're also positively impacted by that. So a few folks have mentioned GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences, which was not renewed at the end of the year. Some of our imported components can take advantage of duty-free entry under that program. So with that program being not in effect, obviously we're suffering a little bit from that and having to pay a little bit more for some of those manufacturing inputs. So it's a dual sided blade, right? Domestic production is great because you do have that immediate control. Plus, you know, if that's something you're passionate about and you want to, you know, develop shoemaking skills in the United States, that's great. But you're still going to have a problem with you can't get everything you need domestically, and you're going to have to be impacted by trade with your domestic production.
Yes, Emily, jump in.
I can't find the raise hand thing on.
That works.
So I agree with Sarah completely. And when you're talking about our industry specifically, so we do performance outerwear. So we have highly technical fabrics that we use. It's been a very long time that those have been developed in Asia. So we're close to the source in a lot of ways when we're using those highly technical fabrics. So from a supply chain efficiency standpoint and a footprint standpoint, it actually makes a lot more sense. That, and as Sarah kind of mentioned, the skill set is not necessarily here to make these highly technical garments either.
I want to touch on this question quickly. And what are your expectations for the new administration in regards to the 301 tariffs? And I'll just say very quickly, our expectation is that they're going to remain in place for the foreseeable future. We don't have any expectation at this point that the Biden administration will ramp up tariffs, bring back 4B, or increase any punitive tariffs. But as we said, his focus is on domestic priorities. And while there will be more emphasis on dialogue and negotiation, multilateralism with regards to China's IP practices, President Biden will still need something in return for lifting the punitive tariffs. And the punitive tariffs do remain popular on the Hill for some offices. So our expectation is not anytime soon. We do hope that and I think there might be an opening to reestablish the exclusion process to give stakeholders another opportunity to file petitions to exclude certain products from the tariffs and exclude them for more than just a year. So that's something that we'll be talking to the Hill administration about. I want to get to this question, and raise your hand, group, who wants to jump first. How are you handling the higher costs you've incurred, higher prices, cutting other expenses, changes in the products? Who wants to tackle that one first before I call on somebody? Ben.
Thanks, Rich. We did increase retail prices. One of the questions was, what are some of the changes you've made that turned out to be good ideas? We increased those prices. We did not see significant impact in terms of unit volumes. And so I think it's just, it's a good learning opportunity in terms of pricing, which of course is multidimensional and very tricky. But I think it's easy to assume that there's less price elasticity than there perhaps is. So that's definitely one piece of it. The other piece of it is we asked our suppliers to share in some of the higher costs. And that's obviously true with Chinese suppliers who were at risk of losing volume. In some cases, particularly where we didn't feel like we had good alternatives, we offered to keep production in China with the assumption that that supplier would share in those costs with us. And in most cases, we were successful. So just a couple of tactics that we deployed here at Sims.
One more question. We're unfortunately running out of time. Maybe Ben and Sarah, again, in the face of a pandemic impacting global supply chains, is there more of a need to develop domestic supply chains to build supply resiliency and invest in closer to domestic customer manufacturing?
I'll take a crack at that just to add to the earlier conversation. My response is yes. The fact that we manufacture on the first floor of our office here in Bozeman has enabled us to respond to the increase in demand this fall and coming into this spring. It certainly isn't sort of the magical solution for some of the reasons that the team panelists already highlighted. But I am certainly a very strong advocate for domestic manufacturing. And we will continue to find ways to expand our capacity here in Bozeman and to identify other suppliers that we can work with in the United States to produce other products with us. So it's not the kind of catch-all that one might think, but it definitely is beneficial in terms of the ability to react more quickly.
And I think it's just supply chain diversity in general is important. And if a part of your diversity is to have some production domestically, I think that's great. It's a great arrow to have in your quiver. However, there's other alternatives, nearshoring, owning some of your own production. Those things also give you more control. But And the other thing that several people have mentioned is just the relationships with your supplier. If you have a supplier that's in China, that's in Vietnam, but maybe you've been working with them for a long time and you understand each other really well, I think that the approaching that from a process of vendor relations and really looking at what you can do to overcome these hurdles is probably more valuable and less damaging to you than making abrupt supply chain changes.
And I'm going to have to close the conversation there. There's so much more we could get to. But stay tuned for more webinars from OIA and our members. I think this peer-to-peer conversation has been really helpful and educational for everyone. So stay tuned for more there. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, panelists, for a great presentation. And look forward to seeing you all in Washington, D.C. in person with your suits on very soon. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.